representing each of the newly drawn legislative and congressional partisan drawn maps. Republicans, as you all know, are trying to draw their way to victory. And if they believe that they truly had a message that spoke to the people of North Carolina and what they wanted to see in our state going forward, they wouldn't have to resort to this type of extreme partisan gerrymandering. North Carolina has had a Democratic governor, a Democratic attorney general, and a 7-7 delegation split. In 2022, 1.7 million North Carolinians cast their vote to send a Democrat to Congress, and 1.9 million cast their ballot for a Republican. We are not a conservative state, and this newly drawn 10-4 map goes against the will of the voters and is not reflective of our state. And it's important to make sure that people know that in this new map, in our new state house and Senate maps, we've seen our Republican legislature specifically target college students, specifically target our most marginalized communities in North Carolina. And we've seen them do this cycle after cycle to the point where we have folks in North Carolina who don't know who represents them at their state house or Senate level because they've been through 6 or 7 different maps over the last 3 election cycles in our state. We are really trying to make sure that folks understand on the ground this year what it looks like in this redistricting situation, and trying to get as many people to the polls as humanly possible next year, because we know that we have the opportunity to take back our state from Republicans. I'm excited to turn it over to one of our champions of democracy, Representative Alma Adams, our congressional delegation chair.
Thank you, Anderson, for that warm introduction, and thank you for your leadership of our party. I want to welcome all of my colleagues here today. Congresswoman Deborah Ross, Congresswoman Val Bushey, and Congressman Nichols and Davis. Senator Blue, thank you, and Representative Reeves for both joining us as well. As you know, North Carolina's state Supreme Court ruled in the redistricting case concerning our congressional and state legislative districts, and that resulted in the current districts that we have now. The courts drew North Carolina as the 50-50 state that it is, with a fair 7-7 congressional map that actually reflects the state's partisan split. I served in the State House for over 20 years. I was there for 2 full redistrictings and a couple of redraws, especially when it comes to my district, the 12th congressional district. I've actually had 5 different configurations since I've been here in the Congress. And after our state's last redraw, I was convinced that the General Assembly Republicans were going to try to draw a 10-4 or even an 11-3 political gerrymander that favors Republicans by over 2-1 in a state that's pretty purple. So it looks like that's how it turned out, and that turned out to be true. It's a dramatic change from a map that gives Republicans and Democrats an equal number of seats to a map that gives Republicans nearly 80% of the state's congressional seats. And these maps are egregious. They don't protect the rights of North Carolina voters and would likely produce 10 or 11 Republican members of Congress and at most 4 Democratic members. The Republicans who lead the General Assembly, they've packed and cracked and stacked the most urban and diverse communities. The 3 Democratic districts are extremely packed, with 70% of each district's voters having supported President Biden in the 2020 presidential election. Mecklenburg County, where I live and represent, is split into 3 congressional districts. South Meck is paired with Columbus County in a district that spans the southeastern border with South Carolina. West and North Meck is paired with Burke and Rutherford counties and a portion of Buncombe. And so if Republicans really have it their way, it's possible that I could be the only Black incumbent victorious in the next year's election in a state that's over 20% Black and over 10% Hispanic and Latino. Now, Mecklenburg County, of course, is a majority minority county. Black, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and other residents combined to be a majority of the population, if not the electorate. And so while we've heard a lot about voter ID, closing polling places and rejecting absentee ballots and reducing early voting hours as ways of disenfranchising Black voters and other communities, we've got to remember that gerrymandering is a way to disenfranchise voters as well. I know it when I see it. This map is explicit political pornography. So if politicians have more influence when they pick their voters than voters do when we pick our representatives, then that means that the system is broken. And that's why the lawsuits, and I hope that we do, have been critically important despite all of the confusion caused by the multiple redistricting and the new maps. As I said before, I have represented 5 different districts in less than a decade. And so if we could get this General Assembly to draw fair districts in the first place, we wouldn't have to put our state through such unnecessary chaos for an entire decade. And that's going to be good for everybody. So we've got to take these maps to court. They've got to be overturned. I could say a lot more, but I've said enough. And I want to just turn the floor over now to my colleague, Congresswoman Deborah Ross, been a fighter and a friend in this fight for the true equity of our delegation's representation. Deborah, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman Adams, and thank you, Anderson, for bringing us all together. I, too, am a veteran of many redistricting fights in the State House. I've now had 2 different districts in the 2 terms that I've now served in Congress, about to get a 3rd. And there's something wrong with that picture. Yesterday, the Republicans in the North Carolina General Assembly proved that their primary allegiance is to their own political self-interest and not to democracy, and certainly not to upholding the will of North Carolina citizens. Rather than, as Congresswoman Adams aptly said, rather than ensuring constituents can be heard, Republicans are silencing voters' voices in pursuit of their partisan goals. They worked in secret, behind closed doors, to dismantle the progress we've made toward a congressional delegation that reflects the rich ideological and racial diversity of our great state. Make no mistake, North Carolina is a purple state through and through. Yet Republicans have enacted congressional maps that effectively ensure that we send 10 Republicans to Congress rather than the even 7-7 split we have today. I have one question for Republicans. What are you afraid of? It is no coincidence that in just a few months, they've passed harmful policies that make it harder to vote and now have enacted extreme partisan gerrymandered maps. They have no interest in ensuring voters can pick their own representatives, and Republican politicians are determined to pick their own voters. North Carolina Republicans are splitting up communities of interest and communities of color across our state, from the Triangle to the Triad to the eastern part of the state, and as Representative Adams said, Mecklenburg County too. They're afraid of the power of North Carolina voters, who are increasingly opposed to their extreme policies, from their radical abortion ban to their efforts to roll back voting rights. These maps are not the first time they've enacted partisan gerrymanders for their own political gain, and it will not be the last time. But one thing is abundantly clear. North Carolinians are fed up, and they will make their voices heard. We will mobilize, we will organize, we will vote, and we will win, particularly statewide. These maps are an egregious abuse of power and a threat to the strength and vitality of our democracy. North Carolina voters will not be silenced. Now I'll turn the mic over to my colleague and representative from part of Wake County, Congressman Wiley Nickel.
Thanks so much, Deborah. It's great to be here with Leader Reeves, Leader Blue, Congresswoman Foushee, Davis, and Adams. And Anderson, thanks so much for bringing us all together today. These maps are an extreme partisan gerrymander, and they're bad for the people of North Carolina. In 2022, we had fair maps for North Carolina. They were maps designed to elect 7 Republicans, 6 Democrats, and 1 district that could go either way. That was North Carolina's 13th district. That's the district we won. It was an R+2 district. It's a district that Donald Trump won the first time. Joe Biden barely won it the next time. and we fought, and the best ideas won at the ballot box. Voters had a real choice. Our district could have gone either way, and they sent me to Washington to do everything I could to bring our country together, to work across the aisle. And the people I find so much in common with in Washington who are willing to work together in a bipartisan way are people in districts like mine, in fair districts, where, again, the best ideas could win. And now we see incredibly gerrymandered maps that take the choice out of elections for voters in all but one district. And I think it helps. We have a lot of lawyers here, lawyers involved, and I want to give some very highly technical legal terms for folks as you're trying to understand the maps. These Republican maps totally screw the North Carolina voters. They have no choice when they gerrymander seats like this, and they are bad for North Carolina. They're bad for competition of best ideas, and they lead to extreme partisanship, where you have people on the far left and the far right who are only concerned with their districts. We need fair maps. We need districts where people can compete for the best ideas. And that's what we had in the last round. And the maps that we saw in the last cycle from the court were fair maps. They were maps that gave voters a real choice at the ballot box. And I can just tell you, we see the chaos and confusion here in Washington because of partisan gerrymandering. Whether it's Democrats or Republicans doing it, it's wrong. And we need to get back to voters choosing their politicians and not politicians choosing their voters. These maps effectively could determine control of the next Congress. We're talking about 3, maybe 4 seats that flip, not because of who's got the best ideas or who's got the best position on issues, but just because Republicans have drawn maps to favor Republicans. And they've done it in a way that works on partisanship and racial gerrymandering with surgical precision. As you look at the maps and you look at the way that they have carved up communities of interest, communities of color, they have been drawn up in a way that eliminates real choice at the ballot box. And this isn't what voters want. They want fair maps. They want a real choice. And it's time now to take this to the next level, the next step, to take these maps to court. And it's time to sue the bastards. Said it before, and that's where we need to go here, because the maps are unfair for the voters. And that's what I'm going to continue fighting for every day in Congress, making sure we get nonpartisan, independent redistricting on the federal level. That's something we can do in Washington. And I'm going to continue to do everything I can in my power to make sure voters have a choice at the ballot box. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from Orange County, Congresswoman Valerie Foushee.
Thank you, Representative Nickel, and thank you so much, Madam Chair, for pulling us all together. It certainly is an honor to be here this morning with Leader Reeves and Blue. And thank you all for how you have stood up in the face of all of this adversity to make sure that North Carolina voters understand what is exactly going on in the General Assembly, and that it is incumbent upon them to make sure that they're joining all of us in this fight. Today, I am proud to stand in solidarity with the North Carolina Democratic Party, my colleagues, and with the voters across North Carolina against the extreme gerrymandered maps that passed the North Carolina General Assembly on yesterday afternoon. Our democracy thrives when its representative bodies are a true reflection of its people. And North Carolina's voting maps should be a reflection of our evenly divided purple state. But once again, Republicans in the General Assembly have chosen partisanship over the people and have miserably failed the voters across our great state. The NC GOP's abhorrent abuse of power through this redistricting process is an egregious violation against the democratic values that our nation was built upon. Instead of empowering our voters to elect their representatives, the Republicans in the General Assembly have decided to cherry pick their voters and create districts that serve them and their party. Unfortunately, our state has a long history of utilizing unethical voter suppression tactics and is no stranger to manipulating our voting maps through underhanded racial and partisan gerrymandering efforts. These newly approved voting maps are not only designed to rig future elections in favor of the NCGOP, but they were also designed to disenfranchise millions of voters across the state and silence the votes and the voices of Black voters and other voters of color. And let me be clear, we cannot have a functional democracy if voters are being silenced before they arrive at the ballot box. North Carolinians deserve better. They deserve a transparent redistricting process and fair voting maps. They deserve to have their voices heard and counted in our election process. And they deserve to be governed by lawmakers who value our democratic process and who want to ensure that every voter can fully participate in our democracy. And again, thanks for having us today. And I think I'm turning it over to Leader Blue.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Foushee. You know, looking at all of those represented here, all of the speakers on this program today served in the North Carolina General Assembly and have been engaged in redistricting of some form. And I dare say nobody, given probably collectively 100 years of service, legislative service, has experienced anything like we saw in this recent round of redistricting. Congresswoman Adams said that it was egregious. And you've heard that theme running through the congressional maps, and the same thing applies to the legislative maps and certainly the Senate maps. Not only are they basically egregious, they're racist. And that's what it is all framed around. And you know, and the sad thing about it, in looking at these districts and the disparity in the congressional districts, basically is also reflected in the House and Senate districts. But more importantly, the sad thing about it all is that the North Carolina Supreme Court enabled this unfair treatment and signed off on it in a way that nobody could ever imagine a constitution which is designed to ensure fairness in the way a state and its elected bodies deal with their people. And said fairness is not one of the things that really matters in the state constitution. But when you look at all of the other efforts that have gone forward in trying to seize the power of the people of the state and give them to the Republican Party, you got to look at the efforts that have been made to strip the governor of any authority over the elections process. You got to look at the efforts to redesign the Board of Elections so that the Republicans basically take control of that. Not just the Republicans, the legislative Republicans. So there's no safeguard or checking on what they have done. Let me simply say that in attacking young voters by trying to change same-day registration and having unreasonable requirements about that, absentee voting, and those other things, not only do they build this unfairness into the districts themselves, but they build it in the apparatus that has been designed to make sure elections are conducted in a fair way. I look at the group represented in this panel this morning. It does reflect North Carolina, Black, white, male, female, in the congressional delegation. I want you to look at the Senate delegation of Democrats. Most representative group of people in the state's history. 2/3 of the Senate Democrats are women. We have people of color. We have males. We have every viewpoint that you can think of represented. Liberal, moderate, conservative. We are North Carolina. And what you see in these maps is an effort to make North Carolina something other than what it is, so that the people are the ones who ultimately are lost in this process. And they think that they can get away with it, that the people are too dumb to know what's going on. Well, I got news for them. People in North Carolina are smart, and people are smarter than these politicians who've tried to take their liberty away by giving us these lopsided, overwhelming Republican districts that give them 3 times the power that they ought to have in the electoral process. Now I want to introduce a colleague of mine from the House who is doing an incredible job as the Democratic leader in the North Carolina House of Representatives, Representative Robert Reeves.
Yeah, thank you for that, Leader Blue, and I'm glad to see all the folks that we have here today. It's and somewhat of a reunion since I've had the opportunity to serve with everybody here before they moved on to Congress. But we appreciate you and think the world of you, and thank you for joining us. And what I would add, I mean, there's not much more I can add that you've heard from these learned people about redistricting, but I would add this point. If you look at the last redistricting that was done, the initial maps that were sent out in 2021 before they were overturned got rid of 14 people. 11 of those people were people of color. Then the final maps at the end of it, when it was all said and done, still were aimed at getting rid of 11 people, 9 people of color, 8 African Americans, and the only Latino person that we had serving, and they were successful. This year seems to be the year of the woman. In the Senate, they have drawn out 2 women who have served and served admirably. While in the state Senate and then in the state House, you will also see that the 2 of the 3 districts that got the worst were 2 districts that effectively drew out 2 outstanding female freshmen that we have in the House, and of course targeted 1 other member who has made news for other reasons. For getting in conflict with the GOP, and that's it. So it seemed a lot very personal, and it was something that we recognize, as Leader Blue talked about. It's something that's been put together and been going on for the last 10 years, but it's been accelerated this year with the supermajority. And just as they took the 5 judges, 4 of those who served on these 3 judge panels, and took their jobs for at least 2 or 3 days to make them sit and think about ruling against the General Assembly, they've now silenced more women's voices because, of course, women were front and center this year as to whose rights were being taken away. And so it's tough for me to watch this. I've made some speeches and debates about it, but it's hard to explain to voters in a 30-second clip, and that's what they're depending on. What they're depending on is that we can't to explain to voters just how they have attacked the rights of every group that isn't them in this state. As I stated earlier this week, I've never seen such an attack on the rights of working people in my lifetime. A concerted effort to make sure that if you go to work every single day, that you cannot serve in the General Assembly, that you cannot be represented in the General Assembly, and that you cannot have a voice that is in the General Assembly to make your life better. And really, that's the only reason we're here for government. You're not here to self-enrich. You're not here so that you can be any type of social media star. You are here to simply make the lives of those people that you serve. And remember, this is still public service. We are here to make their lives better. And there's no way that we can make the lives of all 10.5 million people here in North Carolina better if only 1% of the state is represented grouping wise. And that's really what we've come down to. And so I, as was said so eloquently by Congresswoman Ross, hope that voters pick this up, think about it, and understand what's happening, because this isn't about fairness. Yes, it's about fairness. Yes, it's about doing what's right. But this is a war for working people to still be able to govern themselves. And right now, it has been a straight, full-on attack to make sure that that can happen. So it is, as you've seen, enraged all of us and upset all of us. But you can rest assured we are all here for that fight. We are all here to make it better. And I can speak for me, and I'm sure I can speak for everybody else on this call, that when we have the opportunity to make it better, we will make this better, because this is not a sustainable form of government where people spend all of their time trying to figure out every angle they can to become powerful. And just as you watched this year from the media standpoint, we have now become the most powerful state legislature in the entire country for no reason. So thanks. And I think at this time I will turn over to Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Leader Reeves. And thank you to all my members of Congress. We don't normally get them all in one place because they're all normally so busy in their districts and doing other things. So this is exciting for me too. We're going to take questions from the audience now. If you want to, you could just raise your hand. I hope that you all don't pop off mute just randomly because that might make it a little bit of chaos for us. So, and you can also tell us who you'd like to direct your question to, or you can direct it to the whole and folks can hop off if they would like to. Zach.
Hey y'all, thanks for doing this. This is Zach from Politico. I thought I saw Representative Davis on here. I think he may have left. If he's still here,
No,
unfortunately,
I was gonna say, Zach, we are also gonna schedule another time with Representative Davis specifically. He had to hop off for a 10 o'clock meeting, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
all right. So I'll save my question for him, but I guess for the congressional delegation, I guess specifically Representative Nichol or anyone, y'all have mentioned a lot about the challenging these maps in court. Not questioning that they're a partisan gerrymander, but both federal and state courts, as you guys are aware, said they won't police partisan gerrymandering anymore. So can you lay out what potential case there could be against these maps? You know, they're an efficient partisan gerrymander, but what grounds would you challenge them on?
But Zach, thanks for the question. I think number one, these are clear partisan gerrymander. It is a clear partisan gerrymander, and I believe it's unconstitutional. And if we had a Supreme Court that was willing to act, we should continue to bring that case because it's just wrong. But there are clear racial gerrymandering violations going on. We're seeing successful litigation, successful results from this court on those grounds in other southern states. And I think we certainly see it here.
Yeah, and Zach, I would just say that we are exploring racial gerrymandering claims right now. And, we only really had these new which maps we were going to have very recently, but we're lawyering up.
Echoing
Thanks,
that.
Congressman and Congresswoman.
Laura?
And Madam Chair, before we jump into Zach, I just want to address one point that I think in my mind is going to come up at some point in a redistricting case, and going along with what Congresswoman Ross was talking about. One, you're correct about what the United States Supreme Court has said, that partisan gerrymandering is not necessarily okay, but that they believe that it has to be determined under the state constitutions. Our state Supreme Court at this time, even though they may have signaled, has not ruled on partisan gerrymandering, excessive partisan gerrymandering. They've said that a moderate amount is expected, but excessive partisan gerrymandering was actually ruled on a lower court decision and just not ruled upon by the state Supreme Court. So there is still a challenge available. And I would not presuppose what the judges are going to do, even though our Republican colleagues seem to be very confident for whatever reason that they know what the judges will do. That has not been ruled upon. So I want to make that point. The second point is this. If you look at polling right now, probably under the most polls that you will see will have African-American participation in Democratic voting being at about 95% Democrat. Some of the worst polling that you will see still holds that at 88% support among African-Americans Democratic. So what I believe at some point in time is going to be raised, and I'm not an attorney that does this type of law at all, so I'm not presenting, but I don't see as a practical basis if racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional under our United States Constitution. As a practical matter, I don't see how you can get around that partisan gerrymandering, because of the makeups of the parties at this time, has effectively become racial gerrymandering. And because of that, I do think that there is still plenty of space for racial gerrymandering call, because again, if you are taking a group that is made up of a group that you're not allowed to gerrymander, I don't know how you can then say, oh, well, we took all of these Black people and put them in this area, not because they're Black, but because they're Democrats. Because I don't think that either set of courts, state or United States Supreme Court, would allow you just to relabel somebody and then say that, therefore, we're not doing anything unconstitutional. So just wanted to add that there. Thank you.
Thanks, Leader Reeves. Appreciate it.
It's Laura Leslie. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for taking my question. So actually, Leader Reeves, that was what I was about to ask about. I did want to ask Senator Blue. Senator, you talked about this at some length on the floor yesterday, but I'm wondering if you could explain, sort of in lay people's terms, how it is that you are saying that they have used racial gerrymandering, or that the effect of what they've done has been racial gerrymandering.
Thank you, Laura, for the question. First thing, consider the definitive legal authority in North Carolina as Stevenson case decided in North Carolina. The first requirement and the first mandate in the Stevenson decision is you check these maps and you determine whether there is a need for districts where minorities can elect their candidate of choice. That applies in the Northeast to the congressional redistricting, at least by extension, but it definitely applies to legislative redistricting because that's the decision where we're given the directions as to which you follow to do gerrymandering. So if in fact you refuse to follow the law that relates to how you treat race in redistricting, then you've discriminated on the basis of race in how you do the maps. I mean, that simply follows from the requirements for it. But more importantly, the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution forbids racial discrimination. And it has since immediately after the Civil War. It was designed to protect ex-slaves and people of color. And it is still designed to carry out that purpose. In this map, Republicans have successfully gone back and drove districts that were represented by minorities up to higher levels than they have to be. Now, they pretend that they didn't look at race in drawing these maps. But as Chief Justice Roberts said in the Alabama case, you know, race is something you look at, and legislators already know what the racial makeup is. They don't assume that they're dumb or stupid. And they already know what the racial makeup is. And that's particularly the case with this legislature. We just got through resolving racial discrimination claims in redistricting less than 5 years ago. And it really ran only the 2018 and the 2020 elections on fair maps that did not racially discriminate. And so to now go and say the same maps that did worse than the ones that were stricken in 2016, 2017, but we didn't know about the race of it, is sort of assuming that the court is either naive or they can't read or they don't have common sense. So I think that there are multiple bases on which to attack what they've done with these maps. And if you look with a specific point, Leslie, in Cumberland County, a specific case where the court found that they had unreasonably put all the Black citizens in Cumberland County in the same district, they've gone and done it again. And if it was racial discrimination in 2016, then it's racial discrimination now because you've taken it up to the same level that you had at that time. So I think that there are many ways you can analyze it, but you always come back to not only a violation of Voting Rights Act, Section 2, but a violation of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And by the way, a violation of Article 19 of the North Carolina State Constitution, which has an equal protection clause built into it. And the court seriously, the state Supreme Court, if it ends up there, would seriously have to analyze whether or not there's been a direct violation of that portion by state constitution. So there are many areas that should be examined on the racial discrimination basis that I would imagine people are looking into. And I think that we could get results that a lot of people may seem smug about now, but I think that when we seriously analyze it, you'll see numerous violations of the law.
You would also, sorry to follow up, you had also talked about briefly about Wilmington. Can you talk a little bit about what was done in Wilmington?
Well, first thing, if you look at the background, I think Wilmington is the only city in North Carolina where there's been a coup d'etat back in 1898. So race has played a role in activities in Wilmington. And when they drew this map, they went in and pulled out the 6 precincts in New Hanover County that had the highest Black population and participation. And they switched them with white precincts. some of those predominantly white precincts performed stronger politically than the black precincts. So race had to be a factor in deciding to take these black folk out, almost splitting in half, or not in half, but taking a third of the black political power in the district that New Hanover County generally covers, and pulling them into another district where they're only 6 or 8% of the population. And so I think that all of those things have to be examined. In addition to that, it is a weird looking district because they had to do strange things, violating their own criteria of compactness and some of the other traditional redistricting criteria in order to do it. So they will claim that they did it for partisan reasons, but you can't discriminate on the basis of race for partisan reasons. And that's the thing that they fail to analyze. You can get away with the partisanship. I don't know how much of it. I think extreme partisanship is still unconstitutional, and the state Supreme Court will have to consider that. But you can't do it if you're being racist in the way that you break up the population in Wilmington and its ability to influence the elections in New Hanover County, including the North Carolina Senate election.
Thank you, Leader Blue.
Mhm.
Anyone else have questions? You better ask them while you got them on here, everybody. I ain't gonna lie to you. Any other ones?
You know, as you wait, one thing on that is that as you examine the numbers, I think that all of the districts represented by minorities in the General Assembly had their black percentage increased, which means basically you bleached the districts around it so that you could create Republican districts. And if race played a role in doing that, then that is unconstitutional under a 14th Amendment and Section 19 analysis under the state and federal constitutions.
Laura, did you have another
And
question?
I would just add one thing for the folks who might still be on. Please, in your reporting, in addition to talking about the extreme partisanship and the racial gerrymandering, please highlight that if they are so proud of what they're doing, that they wouldn't have changed the law to deprive the public of information about how they did it. They made it easier to cover up their true intention. And that is just a plain fact.
Gosh, being a party chair
Absolutely.
sometimes, your members of
Great.
Congress and your leadership just make you so happy. Leader Reeves, did you want to follow up on that? And Laura, did you have one more question? I'm sorry about that. I see your hand still raised.
I did. I just wanted to ask because, we heard all week and we hear every time we go through this process from Republicans that it's, Democrats also gerrymandered. They point out the maps that were, the congressional maps in 1990 and 2000. How do you respond? Is this on a different level? Is it at a different scale? Like, what's the response to that?
Laura, I invite you to go back and look at the Democratic maps that were drawn during that time and see whether precincts, townships were just willy-nilly disobeyed, basically split up. Look what the results were. It was a democratically drawn map that allowed the Republicans to gain a majority in the 2010 elections. It was a democratically drawn map that allowed the Republicans to flip the North Carolina House in 1994 and come within one vote of flipping the North Carolina Senate. So I'm trying to figure out where they say all of this stuff happened, where Democrats did the same thing they're doing. What has happened since 2000 is that computers have increased their capability, as you would imagine, exponentially. And they have married technology with their desire to control and totally control. So consequently, they can come up with these weird looking maps, making computations, knowing how people have voted over time. That has never been done in the history of this state until they mastered it in 2011. And they continue to do the kind of redistricting that North Carolina has never seen. Granted, North Carolina was notorious for racially discriminating in its redistricting mechanisms until the 1980s. And you had districts, because of the racial discrimination requiring counties to be held together, requiring at-large elections, that with the county groupings and everything, that racial discrimination had an impact on Republican participation. But the major goal from 1960, 61, when the redistricting decisions came out, that made you start redistricting on an equal population basis from the federal courts. The purpose of any real gerrymandering that occurred then was racially inclined, and that's why it was overridden and overruled in the Jingles decision in the 1980s, which sets the standard for redistricting and considering race. So they can holler it all they want to, but the facts basically show that that has not occurred on the level that they've done it, and that was not the initial purpose of it.
And Laura, I would just challenge anybody to go and look at how many swing districts there were in both the North Carolina General Assembly and in Congress in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And there were many, many more. So there was less of this packing that went on with huge win margins for either party when the Democrats were in charge.
Yeah, I also want to add, I mean, if you just look at where we were before these maps came out, we had an even split. It took the court to do that, but we had 7-7. And so to go now from losing perhaps 4 Democrats, so they're proposing a 10-3-1. I don't see how you can say that that's fair. It is not. It's egregious, and they've actually taken about 40-some% of the Democrat representation, and so that's going to have an impact, as Wally and some others have said, on the representation in the Congress, and I'm sure that was their goal.
I'd say too, our Democratic Party doesn't have to cheat to win going forward. And as you've seen from these maps, right, like we've proved that with 7-7, fairly drawn maps for the state of North Carolina means that we are a 50-50 state. We are a purple state. And we've seen that from independent redistrictors come in and draw our maps for us, just going forward. Any other final questions? I know my members of Congress have got to get to votes and get to a floor. And I know that my representatives from my General Assembly have also got big work to do today as well. So anyone else have final questions? Okay. Leader Reeves, Leader Blue, thank you both so much for joining us. And to my members of Congress, thank you all for joining us too. We really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you on the floor.